Shadow's TC500 is their two-cell thrower light. It features a single XML U2 with a smooth reflector that is geared towards throw, and probably drew a lot of comparison to Sunwayman's TC40CS when it was first released. However, the UI is significantly different in that the TC500, while featuring two switches like the TC40CS, does feature a master on-off switch. When this is off, the side switch is non-functional, and when turned on, it will always default to high, and then cycles through medium, and then low. And at any point, 2 clicks of the switch quick presses will activate strobe. But as you notice, it does cycle to the next level before engaging in strobe. Whereas the T40CS operates a bit differently in that, same thing, there's a master on-off switch, it always defaults to high, but the switch can actually enter standby mode, unlike the TC500. And also, cycling of the modes is done by pressing and holding the switch. Likewise, at any point in time, double-click to activate the strobe. Now, Curlant's 7G5CS, while again being in a similar form factor with the master on-off switch, when you click it, it turns on in high, and likewise, it can enter standby mode. But there are no fixed output levels for this light. Rather, you press and hold to slowly cycle through almost like a dimmer, to go between high, and once you reach a desired output level, you release. So that way, that's your fixed mode now. However, it's not memorized because as soon as you shut off the light, turn it back on, it comes on in max again. So, while similar to its competitors, again, the Shadow's TC500 does utilize a different UI, and therein may lie the difference in how, which light you ultimately decide upon. The TC500 arrived in a generic box again, as with all the other Shadow lights I receive. It features, again, generic sticker indicating the model number as well as which version, cool white or I assume a neutral white. It did also have a tan-colored lanyard that features a little mini steel ring here, or you could just directly attach it to the lanyard attachment ring point here. There is also supposed to be a spare lens and O-rings, although I didn't receive it with my particular review sample, but that is supposed to be part of the standard accessories. Now overall, the style is pretty nice. I do like it in the sense that it is similar to other lights, but then again, a flashlight is pretty much always in the same format, right? You have a head, you have a tube, and you have a tail cap switch. Well, at least the majority of them. There is, like, for instance, like the Claris RS80, which is a completely different type of light that's a handheld, like a lantern style. But for the most part, this does follow along the rest of Shadow's design theme, in that there is this collar around the side switch. There's that nice stainless steel bezel around the side switch as well. Now, while the collar does feature 4 flat sides, doesn't aid in anti-roll at all, since the size of the head itself is so large that when you place down the light, there really is no anti-roll, other than perhaps the interference from the lanyard attachment point here. Now, there is a tactical ring that one can slide back and forth to adjust one's grip to provide additional grip in case it's necessary, or to employ the use of a cigar grip hold. The head I've measured at about 63.3 millimeters, I believe, and that translates to roughly 2.5 inches, and is identical to both the Sunwayman's T40CS as well as the Curlant 7G5CS. Appearing underneath the head, there is a spring on the positive side of the light, so it does allow the use of flat top cells, but keep in mind that because this is a double cell light, you would require at least cells that have a flared raised top, so that way you can make connection between the two cells. Now, these threads are triangular cut and anodized, so you can lock out the light at either end, either the head or at the tail cap. Now, why I have both the TC350 and 750X here is because these 3 lights are Legoable in the case that you could swap around the tubes between these lights, and the TC500 will operate on the TC350's single cell tube. To demonstrate that, here is the TC350's body on the TC500's head, and as mentioned, it will function in this format. TC500 does feature the exact same interface as the TC350, so let's make it a little interesting compact light that is just overall a little bit narrower than the JM26, but of course in this configuration with a shorter runtime. Beam profile wise, the TC500 was designed to be a thrower, so it does have a very tight hotspot, but because of the ultra smooth reflector, you may notice a very slight light ring around the outermost edge, as well as perhaps other ones in between here. Now this is in high mode. This is medium, and you're likely picking up pretty bad flickering as I'm seeing on my LCD, and then finally low. Now it could be that it does utilize PWM, and I am rather sensitive to it, although to my eyes I'm not detecting it right now though. Now one thing I did notice about the beam profile is it does have one of the most pronounced donuts in the hotspot that I've seen. So by comparison, here it is against the T40CS. It does eventually go away with enough sufficient distance from the object that you're shining at, but something to keep in mind if donut holes bothered you. And now by comparison to the 7G5CS, which is probably likely slightly less pronounced than the other two. And again, ultimately it does go away, but with sufficient distance though. So something to keep in mind if you're considering the purchase of this light. Overall beam angle of the spill is roughly about 95 or 100 degrees, and the center hotspot is roughly 20 degrees. Fit and finish wise, the TC500 is pretty much on par with all Shadow's latest releases. Again, it's a uptick since the last time I was exposed to the product, which was the early JM07. The anodizing is pretty much flawless for the most part. I do not notice any missing between the gaps here or around the sharp edges. But it's done in sort of a olive drab color or perhaps a gray gunmetal-ish color. But as you can see, as I had mentioned earlier, there is a slight mismatch between the body, the tube, as well as the head and the tail cap. Now the tail cap, this ring attachment, lanyard attachment point, is a little flimsy, but I suppose it does serve its purposes. It's just not as thick as I'm accustomed to. And also this retaining ring is similar to the TC750X, although slightly better implemented. Now one thing you may have noticed is that this tail cap switch seems to be a little funky in that even after fully lighting it, there is that brief gap where it will shut off before turning back on again. Likely something with the switching mechanism. Perhaps it's limited to just my light, but something to be aware of in case you're considering this light. Ultimately, not a big deal, but for OCDs out there, it might be. My initial conclusion is that this is a solid release from Shadow. As with most of their more recent lights, they're all roughly at about the same degrees in terms of fit and finish, feature-wise, because they all pretty much use the same user interface. There's not really a huge change amongst them, other than, like I said, the styling, which I actually quite like, but of course, that's subjective. I do wish that, again, the anodizing did match perfectly between all the parts. As with the TC750X, I would like to see them switch over to square cut threads like they have on the TC350, perhaps beef up the lanyard ring holder here, as well as that retaining ring, maybe even make a body color if possible. But other than that, it does offer a nice throw, although as previously covered, if you're bothered by donut hose, this one has one of the most pronounced that I've seen on lights in a while, so something to definitely keep in mind if that bothers you. However though, in consideration that this was designed for throw and to be to cast that out at great distances, again, that donut hose should only be an issue in use like fairly up close, and I'm talking about probably within 3 feet or so of the object that you're shining at. So ultimately, I don't think it's a deal breaker. However, though, if that kind of stuff does bother you and you do happen to utilize this light indoor a lot at such short distances, which doesn't really make sense because, like I said, this was designed to be a thrower, this is probably not the light for you. But overall, another solid release from Shadow. I do look forward to seeing them revise this light in a future iteration. And as part of FTC disclosures, the TC500 was provided by sbflashlights.com for review. Thanks again for watching.